Drage gošće, dragi gosti, moje ime je Maja Brkljačić, radim na Sveučilištu Algebra kao voditeljica Istraživačkog instituta Algebra Lab i sa velikim vas zadovoljstvom pozdravljam jutros ovdje među nama. Algebra Lab kao istraživački institut je kao jedan od svojih prioriteta za sljedeće razvojno razdoblje odabrao razvoj i istraživanje u smjeru korištenja umjetne inteligencije u medicini u čitavom nizu pristupa, čitavom nizu područja u kojem umjetna inteligencija u medicini može naći svoju primjenu. S time u vezi sudjelujemo kao nositelj projekta o primjeni umjetne inteligencije u medicini koji se financira iz europskih fondova u velikom konzorciju od nekakvih 10-ak partnera, među kojima se nalaze Medicinski fakultet u Pavi, Medicinski fakultet u Napulju, Royal College of Surgeons u Dublinu i koji je zapravo, taj projekt je pokrovitelj ujedno i ovog našeg današnjeg susreta. Kao institucija već se lijep dio vremena izuzetno trudimo uspostaviti veze sa što većim brojem zdravstvenih institucija u Hrvatskoj, pa shodno tome i današnji naši gosti i predavači dolaze upravo i sa hrvatskih zdravstvenih institucija. Naš današnji program sastoji se od 3 dijela. U prvom dijelu programa će nam dr. Scott Harrison sa Technische Universität u Leibnizu ispričati o istraživanju koje smo proveli u sklopu projekta koji se ticao upravo tog problema ili izazova pred kojima se sad nalazi zdravstveni sustav, a to je kako premostiti nedostatak, odnosno nove vještine koje se počinju postavljati kao zahtjev pred zdravstvene djelatnike uslijed velikog pritiska koji digitalne tehnologije, prije svega umjetna inteligencija, stavlja pred nas. Nakon toga imamo predavanje doktorice Ive Kirac i završit ćemo sa predavanjem doktora Iva Pedišića, o čijim predavanjima ću reći nekoliko riječi malo kasnije kad se tim predavanjima približimo. Dr. Scott Harrison je istraživač na Technische Universität u Leibnizu i inače po porijeklu Australac, što ćete moći prepoznati iz naglaska njegovog engleskog. I on će nam predstaviti rezultate istraživanja koje smo proveli u sklopu ovoga projekta. And therefore, Scott, please come and join us. The floor is yours. You can stand there and switch this, or you can walk around. Whichever way works for you.
All right, so let's see. Here we go. Good morning, and thanks very much, Maya, for the introduction. I will also be very conscious of the fact that I'm speaking English in my native tongue, so I'll try and go a little slower, just so that I don't catch everyone off guard. So thanks very much for attending this morning and the invitation to present. So I'll be talking about essentially a sister project to the AI for Vet for AI project that's also being run by Algebra, as Maya's indicated, and this is called AI to Med. And in particular, what I'll be doing today is presenting some results essentially from our transnational research report that we conducted as a part of the project. So the overall project goals, so sorry if this is somewhat repeated from what Maya introduced, but the 2 main goals essentially associated with the project is to empower medical and data science experts with essential AI and medical skills, or AI and med related skills. And the other part of that is really the trust building component, where we know that there's going to be the need to build trust and with respects to when it comes to using AI, and the trust with respects to many different dimensions. That is the trustworthiness of the AI output, but also trust that people are going to be using it in an ethical and meaningful manner. And there's a list of our partners that I think Maya's already gone through. So quite a consortium covering 11 partners across 7 countries in total. So one of the things is, sorry, and I'm also getting used to the presentation space, I've got a screen over here. So we had basically 5 main objectives that we wanted to achieve with respects to the development of this particular transnational report and what we were focused on. So the first part of that is about identifying the relative skills space that's already there inside the medical profession, and trying to understand, you know, what are the skills that are currently being taught and needed by people within the medical space, and then also to highlight the emerging skills that are going to be necessary to support the adoption of AI within the medical space. We also then had, you know, essentially assess the skills gaps that are arising across Europe, and in particular how this may vary between the different countries, not only within our immediate consortium of 7 countries, but perhaps across Europe in a more broader context. So the most important part of this was for us, and especially with our skills analysis, is to be able to then translate this into actionable items. So it's all very well and good to come up with some sort of report and research that we might do in this particular space, but if we can't translate that into action, then what value does it have? And in particular, we've seen this, if I was to make sort of a summary of what I see, in particular the dialogue when it comes to AI and skills, we tend to find there's a lot of very general comments being made, but when it comes to the nuts and bolts and being very specific about the types of skills that are required, it becomes much harder to actually get a very solid foundation of those skills requirements. And so this is really actually also one of the big challenges. Yeah, and then basically defining the need AI and med skills and competencies. And part of that was really aligning this with some of the existing EU frameworks that are in place with respects to skills and skills competencies, not only in medicine, but in broader digital competencies. So how did we go about doing our research, and why is this so important? One of the things that we thought, especially with this particular domain, is we're going to do an expert analysis. And by doing an expert analysis, we could try and find those people who are already working in the field, who are sort of maybe mid to late career professionals, who would have some degree of exposure to what is happening in the broader field associated with the IT systems that are being introduced and the AI systems. So we wanted to talk to these experts, and we thought, well, okay, well, let's do this in a 2-stage interviewing process, where in the first stage we'll ask some very broad general questions, and then in the second stage we take all of that feedback that we've just garnered from the first stage and reiterate it, revise, and put it back to the experts to help us get more specific, more actionable information out of this. So we used essentially a survey instrument that we designed to create 16 questions across sort of 4 scales, or 4 main domains, I should say. And that was, we were mainly interested, one, in the expert's background. We wanted to make sure that we were reaching the right people to provide information on this. The second one was to understand the expertise in patient safety and the patient safety related issues. Now, this is mainly because the project AI to Med is mainly focused on enhancing patient safety. So it's not just AI in medicine. In particular for AI to Med, we're really interested in the safety and the patient safety side of this. So we need to make sure the experts that we're recruiting aligned and had a good understanding of the different patient safety domains. And if you want to check out the different domains, you can always look at the World Health Organization's guidelines, and I think there's around about 12 different domains of patient safety that we look at, ranging from sepsis control to medication sort of adherence and these sorts of areas of patient safety. We also then wanted to ask, obviously, the experts about their understanding and exposure to AI. One of the key things when it comes to understanding of AI is we know that there's a lot of different definitions and ideas out there as to what constitutes an AI system, and it is really a buzzword at the moment. So one of the challenges there is trying to get a baseline understanding of what people's expectations were associated with AI systems, and then also their experience or exposure to skills training. So what training is already starting to take place within the different sort of domains and organisations associated with health and medical training in AI is concerned. So in total, we ended up with about 100 different experts. We approached around about 100 different experts to provide feedback on this instrument, and then we ended up with, I think it was 51 experts' responses, 30 from the first round and then 21 in the second round. Most of those respondents in the second round were from the first round, so part of the idea was to get reinforced sort of understanding and more detail from them in that second round. And then we supplemented this analysis from the experts with also an analysis that we did of the ESCO skills framework. So one of the sort of issues and sort of main things that we could take away was that there was somewhat limited exposure to existing AI systems and relevant AI training. Most of the experts, we could maybe list a limited degree of exposure, but most of our participants at least had really very little to no exposure at this stage. But that being said, mostly it was overly well received, and most of them were fairly positive with respects to using AI and having AI systems help enhance and improve patient safety outcomes. We also found that the key stakeholders and some of the people that we need to be addressing when we're trying to look at implementing and adopting AI systems into the space is really mostly at the board level. So most organisations or medical organisations have a medical board attached to them that will help associated with, say, licensure or other regulatory components associated with running their organisations. So they're going to be probably the key stakeholder when it comes to implementing AI systems. And the other one being at an even higher level at the ministry level. So these are sort of the really two key stakeholders that we need to be engaging, or stakeholder groups, I should say, when it comes to trying to enhance and get more AI adoption happening. So when we looked at the experts basically provided a bit of feedback for us on what systems they'd already seen. We had a pharmacologist, someone working in pharmacology, I should say, sorry, and they said they were already using AI systems there. And there's some fantastic work being already done with AI systems doing predictive chemical analysis, basically, of identifying chemical compounds that can already be used for different medical conditions. We also have, obviously, digital patient safety or digital patient record management. This is obviously one of the really big areas that's going to be impacted by this, and we can maybe have a conversation later about whether that's positive or negative. I think it's mostly positive, but there's obviously some risks, and if you're not familiar with for instance, the Microsoft example that happened, I think it was just last year, this is something to be well worth being versed about, where essentially some patient safety or patient data was essentially leaked through an AI system, which is also then one of the inherent risks associated with this. And some of the other spaces, I think most people are familiar with the radiology examples, but we're also now seeing adoption of AI into, say, EKG interpretation, and there was a few projects that were listed as from our experts there. So it is happening, and it's just going to be somewhat still narrow in scope at this stage, and trying to get broader and wider adoption is going to take time. Sorry, and I seem to have missed that one. Okay, so we actually asked the experts themselves to give us some feedback on the protocol that we developed and how well they thought it was capturing their views and understandings associated with the AI landscape. And the protocol was overwhelmingly received quite positively. There was some very good and constructive feedback as to what we can do if we were to use this protocol into the future to create a more enhanced version, essentially, of this interview process. One of the key really the sort of key feedbacks that we got from the experts was the importance of integrating case studies and a broad range of case studies into any sort of future training or curricula that we do here. And the role that case studies play is to help ensure that people are getting a wide variety of scenarios and situations where they can interact and see how AI may plug into their processes associated with giving care, and also how that's maybe going to enhance the patient safety outcome side of things. So, and associated with those case studies and making sure that we have a broad range of cases to work from is also then the practical workshop component, so providing people the opportunity to have hands-on experience associated with using the AI systems themselves and seeing how they can improve the situation. It's also then important to also point out there the role of simulations in this particular situation. This is also one of the key areas that artificial intelligence can probably assist in the medical domain, is through the simulation space, where you will have the opportunity to run scenarios and situations that are not going to necessarily have the negative, potentially life-risking outcomes that would normally happen. And in this regards, AI and even augmented reality are going to be some of those opportunities to make simulations a little bit more realistic, a little bit more lifelike, to try and help enhance the learning outcomes that may come from those workshops and simulations. One of the other key feedbacks that we had from our experts was about the importance of building communities of practice. So this is people who we can interact with and build those communities. And talk to people, especially outside of our immediate cohort of friends and colleagues, the importance of liaising with people from other countries and other communities. This is actually going to be really important. In fact, that's one of the key things I feel like this project can contribute in this regards. And then the final part is, of course, getting medical practitioners and people within the clinical space to feel excited about the idea of studying again. This is something that isn't easy to do, but telling people that you need to go and study more after they've already spent 7 years studying to become a doctor, or 5 years to become a highly regarded medical registrar is not easy. It's not easy to engage people in the idea of studying more. So in that regards, we took this feedback, and one of the key recommendations that I'll get to in the end is how we go about integrating the skills into the curricula that's currently there, and the importance of not necessarily adding extra teaching to the process, but augmenting what's already there and existing. So then, when it came to, and I highlighted at the beginning, the importance of actionable outcomes, what we wanted to do then essentially for this project was to come up with a list of skills that needed to be focused on and trained and enhanced associated with AI. And this list of skills should be very concrete as far as the definitions of the skills are concerned, and where they're positioned with respects to the different professions and careers in the medical space. So the way that we grounded this particular part of the research was to use what's called the ESCO framework. So this is the European Skills and Competencies Organisation framework. And what we did was we basically looked at the labour markets from the 7 participating countries that we had. We looked at the top medical professions from them, and we basically took those top 10 medical professions and extracted from the ESCO database a list of skills associated with each of those professions. So one of the good things about using the ESCO framework is it provides very clear, distinct definitions for each and every skill that they've got, and there's been a lot of researchers working behind the scenes to make this framework happen. So, and ESCO was just updated to version 1.2 in May last year, so it's reasonably current. I say reasonably current because there's always going to be an issue, especially when it comes to AI skills and their definitions, coming into some sort of existing framework like this that sometimes takes years to update. So yeah, we ended up with a list of 294 skills, and these were the 10 professions that we looked at to extract the skills from. So if you went into the ESCO skills database, you can basically plug in any one of these professions and you'll find a list of skills associated with those professions. We did focus on the essential skills only at this stage. So if you go into ESCO, it'll provide a list of essential skills, but it'll also present a list of sort of essentially optional or extra skills that can be taken on for those professions. If we use the extra skills or outside of the essential scope, the list was probably going to become quite unmanageable. So we focused only on the essential skills at this stage, but even that was still sufficient. And so how do we take these skills and where did we go to from there? So we had 294 skills, but we wanted to really drill down into which of those skills are going to be relevant for AI skills adoption and what's going to be possibly most important. So we used the other key framework here, which is called the DigiComp 2.2 framework. There's a DigiComp framework that provides essentially definitions of different skills and competencies that, if you use the citizens framework, you can basically see, okay, these are the types of skills that I'm going to need if I want to be a digital social person into the future, so to speak. And so what we did was we cross-referenced our list of skills to the competencies framework to identify which of those was actually relevant. And what we came back with was, from that original 294 skills, we got a list of 52 that were actually relevant to digital skills and digital competencies. From this, we then also augmented this final list using essentially the ONET list of skills and also the OECD AI principles to classify each of these skills on a 5-point scale as to how likely is it going to be that this particular skill is going to be impacted or affected by AI. So you can see that if the skill was rated 1, there was going to be a minimal impact. There was going to be little to no impact from AI on this particular skill set. As we moved up the scale, you can see you've got, say, 2 as an augmentation, but 3 is, sort of moderate automation, and all the way up to full automation at 5. So most of the rankings associated with the skills would fit probably in a 2 to 3 space. So it would be fairly rare that you get a skill that was maybe rated 4 or 5, but that was essentially to be seen when we got into the analysis phase. So here's just a sample. This is just a subsample. This is 10 of those 52 skills. But I wanted to just present the skills so that you could see what kinds of information was being retrieved essentially through this analysis. So we have things such as evaluate scientific data concerning medicines, identifying patient medical records. You start seeing a very distinct pattern when we start coming into this, which is most of the current skills that are being taught to those professions are going to be impacted, especially with respects to patient record management. That's really going to be one of the key areas that we can see. What was interesting is that we've also then got, managed healthcare users data. So it's not only just the record management itself, but then the processing of the user data or the medical records that's going to become essential in that process. One of the interesting things that we see, though, as well, was things like processed medical insurance claims came up. And this is something that we don't necessarily think about quite often, when we're dealing with medical situations, but the reality is nearly every medical system currently has some degree of relationship to the insurance industry, be it through regulation or claims processing. And so one of the ways that we can see AI having an impact is not only being able to analyse and interact with user data or patient data, but then also go into the processing of, say, the medical insurance claim, so it can retrieve the necessary information from one data set, integrate it with a similar data set, to then maybe automate or make that processing of, say, an insurance claim much easier, be it at a private or a public institution. And so what we sort of really extracted from this list was that it's not necessarily we're expecting everyone to become a data scientist or an analyst. That's going to be some people's positions within this. What we sort of get a better feel for from this is that it's actually mostly people's capacity to interact with data, and in that regards, it's going to be people's capacity to also then have an understanding of where data is coming from and going to, and how it's being used and transformed in that process. So what do we see when we start looking at the differences across our regions? So we had 7 countries involved in the consortium, and we saw that there's naturally going to be a highly varied capacity to adopt AI across the 7 partner nations. And part of the reason for this is going to be systemic, as far as like, you know, how the systems are structured in those different countries. Part of it's going to be cultural as well. And there's also going to be, you know, resource constraints associated with that as well. You know, the different capacities of various countries to invest in the medical infrastructure and the digital infrastructure that's going to underpin AI is going to be inherently important in that. So what we see is that, you know, in particular, Ireland, Germany, and Italy, you know, they are going to represent the biggest movers and perhaps spaces that AI is going to have an impact, partly from just a pure population size and therefore healthcare system size side of things. And we know that, for instance, in say, Ireland, there's a lot of opportunities there, partly from the resource capacity side. Ireland's heavily invested into the IT industry. It has a lot of capacity already when it comes to adopting IT systems. Ireland's probably then, I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, say a little bit further ahead than Germany on this particular front. And Germany's trying its best, but there's significantly different cultural issues that we're dealing with in Germany associated with, say, using and accessing patient data. So there's going to be different countries moving at different rates. But one of the key things that we sort of took away from this is that there's a great opportunity, you know, to really facilitate the technology transfer between countries and where innovation's happening, and also promoting innovation that's happening locally during the processes. And in that regards, it's also the opportunities for technological leaps. So rather than just, you know, doing a sort of a procedural upgrading of systems and small incremental enhancements, perhaps with this AI situation, there's an opportunity to maybe skip a few technological steps essentially along that process and enhance the systems much quicker. And as we come back to it, one of the key things, as we said, from the expert side of things, was the communities of practice are going to be vital for the adoption of AI across regions. So what are some of the key challenges that we found? Okay, I don't think anyone's going to be surprised here when we start talking about the challenges of AI. This tends to be the part that we get rammed home on. You know, data accessibility and quality is going to be one of the biggest issues. The capacity for us to integrate information systems even within organisations sometimes can be a challenge. And so it's going to be a challenge for any organisation to really get the access and ensure that the data that's being transferred between the data silos that are developed maybe over, you know, last couple of decades can be broken down. We know that the privacy regulations, both nationally, EU level, or even within an organisation, are going to also be one of the biggest restricting factors and the challenges that we have to deal with. We know that, for instance, and I haven't really brought it up here, but we should all be very familiar, or starting to get familiar with the EU AI Act and how that's going to have an impact, especially in the medical domain, especially when it comes to being deemed high risk in most cases when you start dealing with patient data and the requirements that come with that as far as registering the systems are concerned. We also have highlighted one of the biggest challenges, and this is actually what the project's really hoping to address, is the training gaps, and that's the absence that we have already of The other one being high implementation costs, as we said, one of the biggest challenges that most countries are going to face is essentially trying to find ways of implementing AI systems in a meaningful manner that's going to have impact whilst also not costing a lot. And if anyone's been following the latest trends in AI associated with the cost of even just running AI systems, we can see that there's already some big changes happening in the space as to how much it costs to train and maintain AI models. So hopefully we could look forward to a future in the not too distant future, I should say, where maybe it's not going to cost near as much to run, train and maintain AI models and AI systems. And then, of course, the regulatory and ethical challenges that are always going to be an issue associated with implementing the AI systems. And then, so where do we sort of come out at the end of this process? One of the key things that we have that we can see is that there's obviously transformational potential here with AI in healthcare. You know, it's one of those spaces that's ripe for enhancing patient safety. We also know that while there are going to be some regional disparities, there's a lot of great opportunities there. And most importantly, when it comes to really adopting and enhancing the use of AI, we have to look at the multi-stakeholder approach, and that's making sure that we have meetings like this one, where we've got lots of different stakeholders from different organizations coming together, where we can talk and navigate the different spaces and where we go from here as far as implementing our different AI solutions and getting people to use them. So that pretty much wraps up the discussion and our report and what we had to do. I've just included a link here to the deliverables, which is the full report that you can download. The report's designed to be readable, hopefully, so it's sort of only around about 40 pages with some appendices on top. And if you have any questions by any means, feel free to contact myself, and we can go from hopefully helping you guys out as far as understanding any of the questions you might have from the report. And with that, I've got about 5 minutes left for questions, guys. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Any questions, comments at this point? Scott will be here with us for the entire duration of today. If you could just introduce yourself, please.
Thank you very much, Jana Skolar, Scientific Institute Rudolfo Novo Mesto, Slovenia. What I wanted to ask you is, I really admire your research, but what I see, what is happening among us, because AI is very fast, much faster than we can think or communicate. So we have to be careful and fast. Just yesterday we had a debate in academia and some faculties. There's quite a big gap, divide growing between the space of developing of technology and all the models and our acceptance. Because we can perceive actually in EU that a very strong, let's say, attempt to make it slower, not to expose people, not to expose children. What is your opinion on this ethical or development challenges? Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, okay, that's a really good question. I think when it comes, so I'm going to try and base my response mostly in the medical domain and how I would interpret it essentially in this particular context, because I think it can be fraught with danger if we start thinking about AI and ethics in the broader context. I think one of the biggest challenges that we're going to have here is helping educate people and users. Most of this is going to be focused in the AI systems that we're going to be implementing, or is about people who are going to be using or interacting with these systems. One of the biggest ethical considerations, especially that we're dealing with here, is then how the systems that are implemented are maintaining and using people's data over the long term, and also we have to obviously also then think about people's capacity. This is, we've seen this with GDPR, for instance, people's capacity to request their data to be removed from the system. What does that mean for an AI model if someone asks to have their data removed? Can we untrain a model, essentially to remove someone's data from there? So I think there's some interesting challenges in that regard. But I think one of the biggest sort of ethical challenges there we also then have is maybe like, sorry, I'm just sort of spitballing an idea here, but, what happens after someone dies? Because they can't really give consent, or interact or provide any sort of request to have their data removed. So how do we start interacting with the inevitable sort of side of things when it comes to, say, data management, data usage principles, when, part of that is going to be, people who can't consent or give responses in that regard. So that's also one of the biggest issues I think that we've got to deal with there. And then I think finally, as we've seen, there is huge risks already that we've identified. I didn't give much of an introduction about my background, so I'm actually an economist and a statistician in terms of my academic background. One of the interesting things that I found across my own research a number of years ago was the amount of data and information needed to re-identify someone. So if we're using anonymous data, how much information do you need to re-identify someone who is essentially anonymous in a data set? And I can tell you now, it's not much. You really don't need much data at all to re-identify. And I think this is also then going to be one of the really big, interesting challenges going forward, is how do we address that concept of anonymity and anonymizing data when anonymity as a concept may actually have already left the building, so to speak. We may no longer be anonymous people, and that's actually kind of a little bit scary in some regards.
Thank you, Scott, so much.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mi smo danas jako ćemo se baviti sa